Transgender Action Bloc are organising a protest outside the LGBT Alliance's annual conference at the Queen Elizabeth II Centre in Westminster in London, just down the road from Parliament. That's taking place on Friday, the 21st of October. They will be there all day from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Just telling you about it here because we did not get it in time to put in the main episode. So yeah, if you are interested in protesting the LGBT Alliance, Transgender Action Bloc will sort you out. So go do that. Alright, on with the pod.
The category is What the Trans Darling.
Hello, and welcome to What the Trans.
What the Trans? Hello and welcome to the show. We are back. How are you, Michelle? That's a perfectly normal way of saying it, isn't it?
I went to a bar and it was loud and I was there late and I'm 37 and I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
I used to be able to do that and now my throat hurts and I'm tired and I'm just, bars, they're silly and loud and why would I go there? Oh, also I should say, if you could hear hammering, dear listener, it's because there are people around my building with hammers. And I have no control over that because my studio is the corner of my bedroom that is the quietest. So sorry about that. You might hear hammers. And it's not me, it's people outside with hammers.
Just about to say I've got a similar problem. There are, even here on the 9th floor, there are men outside with drills rather than hammers. Because we've got, on the building that I live in, we have the bad kind of cladding. So that is being removed, and it's taken them ages for them to put the scaffolding up, and it's taken them ages to do surveying. And now they're actually finally doing the thing, finally removing the cladding. But it's noisy, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, that cladding is famously terrible, so I'm very glad they're getting rid of it, but also
yes, me too.
People with hammers tend to be quite loud, and I'm quite delicate today. I didn't drink. I don't really do much drinking, but I still feel hungover.
Just from having left the house so late at night, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I just remember thinking at like 10:30, I'd like to go and read a thing in bed, maybe play a little Switch.
Yeah.
That's my habit. But instead, I went to a place in North London that had people dancing on tables.
Impressive.
And they were paid to do that. They weren't just, enthusiastic. Like, they were people... And I met people who were wearing string.
Right.
Like, just string. I'd heard of this kind of clothing, which is just string, but I've never really seen it before. Outside of, like, a weekend in Amsterdam when I was 19.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's better than just wearing whipped cream.
Well, I mean, I think technically the string was clothing, so that is above whipped cream. But still, I was just like, I don't feel comfortable unless, like, I'm covered up.
Yeah.
These people are very different to me, but I respected their lack of care for that kind of thing.
Yeah, you gotta respect their confidence that someone has to have to just go out wearing string.
I mean, they looked really good. It really suited them, the string. It looked really cool, but it was still string, like probably quite cold for October in the United Kingdom.
I think the last time I was actually at a bar in the evening, it wasn't just a bar, it was when I came down to Southwark to watch The Prince that we spoke about in the last episode, and in fact made a YouTube video about, which I forgot to mention in the last episode, which is kind of not very professional of me. But yeah, so that was the last time I was out and about at night. But I can't drink. I've not been able to drink alcohol for months now, if not over a year, because of the sheer amount of medication that I'm on. So yeah, the whole going out and getting drunk thing it's off the table, unfortunately. So I kind of live vicariously through people telling me how their evenings went, those who are my age who are still going out. And I'm just like, how do you manage this? Particularly the ones that have kids. It's, how are you even managing this? But
do you want me to start drinking more so
No.
you could live through me? Because I can, but I kind of don't want to.
Yeah, and that's fair, that's valid, and, you know, you're allowed to not want to drink, which is what I've been saying about Manchester's Village for years. It's just drinking spots, and fine, great, at Pride, at night, that's what you want, but to have an actual sort of community, you kind of need to have a little bit more going on than just bars. You know, where's the queer bookshops? Well, okay, so there's two of them in Manchester. One's in the Northern Quarter and one's in Affleck's. But as in, where are the queer bookshops and art
having
spaces?
a diversity of spaces. Yeah. Like I would frequent a milkshake bar. Milkshake is like my favorite drink in the world. If they had a milkshake bar, I would live there.
Exactly. Anyway, so let's. This has been fun, waxing lyrical about going out and drinking, but unfortunately, there's a thing we need to do. What is it now? What's the... Oh, God, not the news.
Again? There's always news.
There is always news.
We're doing it again?
It never stops, does it? But then sometimes by the time we get to the news, it's olds. You know, because we're kind of doing a bit of a breakdown of it several weeks after the fact and saying, hey, so this thing was nonsense because of this. And interestingly, this episode very much carries on that tradition.
Yeah, I have a feeling that our first story and possibly the second will be an ongoing thing for a while, but I'll let you take it away.
Sadly, yes. So, starting off, we of course have the ongoing media shitstorm around the fact that Mermaids, the charity, continues to exist. It seems like only yesterday that we were talking about this utter tosh and fuckery, but here we are again. Now, we promise we've not used the same script here from the last 17 times Mermaids has been targeted, because this time, on one of these points, Mermaids genuinely did make a terrible, terrible mistake. And I did not want to say that, but here we are. So Mermaids have recently spearheaded an attempt by several LGBT organisations to challenge the legality of the UK Charity Commission's decision to grant the anti-trans hate group LGB Alliance charity status. It was astonishing that that happened, but there we go. So this is part of the pushback. Ever since that began, then with Mermaids being part of this process, pushing back against that granting of charity status, Mermaids have been put right in it. First, there was controversy over a now former trustee giving a speech to a so-called Minor Attracted Persons Support Organisation called B4U Act. A man named Dr. Jacob Breslow, an academic who specialises in gender, social movements and other social justice type stuff, had previously been pretty vocal about his apparent glee at the idea that paedophiles would be able to form activism groups demanding treatment and other support. Now, we here at What the Trans have been trying to get to the bottom of what the real deal is with B4U Act and Dr. Breslow, but whether they are a legit organisation who seeks to prevent child abuse, or whether they are something far more sinister and evil, the fact remains that Dr. Breslow should never have passed through the gates of Mermaids Towers. But it later appeared that Mermaids are also of that opinion, because upon this being revealed, the charity seemingly cut ties with Breslow, who resigned his position as a trustee in early October after serving there for only 3 months. Mermaids' chair of trustees, Belinda Bell, then released a statement stating, amongst other things, "We want to apologise for the distress and concern that this news has caused. It is clear that Dr. Breslow should never have been appointed to the board, and as chair of the trustee board, I am horrified that he was. All trustees and staff are subject to background checks, including enhanced DBS searches, DBS being the Disclosure and Barring Service, social media reviews, and other due diligence. On this occasion, we also placed weight on the fact that his employer, the London School of Economics, is a globally renowned institution that would have carried out its own checks. But clearly none of this was enough. You will want to know what steps we are taking to ensure we are more rigorous in future. First, we are commissioning a review of our trustee recruitment process to be carried out by an external expert body. We will enact its recommendations. Second, we are evaluating our policies and procedures, again in conjunction with an external expert body. Third, we have updated the Charity Commission on the matter and the steps the charity intends to take to ensure that there is transparency about what happened. We should also say that Dr. Breslow was a trustee for a very short period of time, during which he had no interactions with any of our young people or families, and only attended one regular quarterly board meeting.
Just so you know, the Mermaid statement didn't name the London School of Economics. We added it in so people would know who they were talking about, which clearly was that. But I basically popped that in so people could
we've put
follow.
that in for clarification.
Yeah.
Understood. Okay. So, well, that's obviously the end of the statement, but since this colossal fuck-up on Mermaid's part, the knives have come fully out for the charity that primarily exists to support trans youths and their families. Media controversy has been kicked up over Mermaids in a number of areas, including, but not limited to, allegedly sending binders to youths without getting parental consent, a thing which isn't illegal, certainly isn't wrong, moralising nonsense over a former Mermaid staff member posting pictures of himself dressed as a schoolgirl on Instagram and doing some sexy pictures for House magazine, a publication that nobody here at What the Trans had ever heard of until all of this nonsense came out in the media. Now, Mermaids recently released another statement saying that the staff member in question no longer works for Mermaids, and despite claims otherwise in the media, the Charity Commission has not been in touch with Mermaids in regards to an investigation. Now, it has been misleadingly reported that the Charity Commission is investigating Mermaids over these issues, but the truth is the Charity Commission is currently looking at whether they should investigate at all. We will keep you up to date with their decision, but so far the Charity Commission are not really investigating Mermaids. Subsequently to all this, the DFE, Department for Education, has removed Mermaids from a list of mental health and well-being resources for schools, just as a precautionary measure, air quotes clanging into place around that of course, whilst the Charity Commission decides if Mermaids are worth investigating or not. Woohoo! But the kicker to all of this, if it can be described as such, happened on Wednesday the 12th of October during Prime Minister's question times at the House of Commons, where Conservative MP Miriam Cates asked Prime Minister Liz fucking Truss, a phrase I cannot believe is true, if she agreed that the police should investigate Mermaids, with Liz Truss stopping just short of fully agreeing by responding that Mermaids should be, in her words, raised and looked at properly without mentioning the police. Naturally, many news outlets, including The Telegraph and The Guardian, ran stories about Liz Truss calling for a police investigation into Mermaids, which just isn't actually true. But, you know, whatevs. Now, according to thirdsector.co.uk, Mermaids have fired back by dismissing Kate's call for a police investigation by pointing at the MP's attitude to gay and trans organisations being well documented. What did they mean by that? Well, they were probably referring to the times that she has openly attacked LGBT charities working in schools, like she did in November 2021. But there is allegedly a far darker side to Miriam Cates' nonsense. According to the Trans Safety Network, who we've spoken of quite highly on the podcast before, Kate has established an extremely far-right think tank called the New Social Covenant Unit, which has published a 12-point manifesto which railed against gay marriage and the concept of divorce, while also damning immigration and, quote-unquote, globalism, which TSN pointed out is a term that has links to anti-Semitic nonsense about Jewish globalists running the world. They also pointed out that Miriam Cates was a director of the St. Thomas Philadelphia Church Group until September of 2018, which is a year before she became an MP. Now, what's particularly fascinating about this is that it's the church which has previously been accused of practicing conversion therapy in the form of exorcisms in Sheffield. Now, according to a report by The Star, in Sheffield, gay Christian Matt Draper claimed the church had performed an exorcism on him with the aim of removing his gayness. Astonishing that people think that that would work, but there we go. Miriam Cates later denied that she knew anything about the conversion therapy going on in the church and was no longer a member of it. So she's clearly fine then. So paedophile links, media fuckery and far-right Christian MPs have been making life for Mermaids incredibly difficult lately, and surprising no one, during all of this, Mermaids Helpline has, according to the charity, been inundated with abuse, forcing the phone line to close entirely at first and then to operate on reduced hours. So they are less able to help young trans people, they are less able to provide that support to an already vulnerable set of the population. Awesome. So what do you make of all of that, Michelle?
Well, there's a lot of that, isn't there?
There is a lot. There is a lot, yes. Should have said that at the start. Content warning. A lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know where to start. I mean, there was always going to be pushback against Mermaids when they kind of put themselves as the lead group in this challenge against the Charity Commission over the LGBT Alliance's charity status. That was always going to have some pushback. But then this has been far more than I thought it was. Like when it was first starting off, I think one of the first things was when one of the first ones was like controversy over the binders thing, because like an undercover journalist, I think for the Telegraph, pretended to be like a trans masculine, maybe non-binary kid, which is weird. That's a weird thing to do, but go for it.
Yeah,
and
you go off if you must.
And was talking like and got a binder out of it, I believe. And at that point, I was just like, well, Mermaids have survived far worse. I mean, we've all seen Mermaids have survived far worse than this. But then,
indeed,
the paedophile group link thing, which is just, oh my god, like, Mermaids really, really fucked that. Like, although to be honest, by the sounds of things, I think they'd agree with me. Like, and then from there, all this other stuff, which like. I mean, one of the stated goals of the organised anti-trans movement in the UK has kind of been to destroy mermaids.
Yes.
And now they're really going for it. That's the goal. They want mermaids gone from the planet, which is why
well, they want all of us gone. They want trans people to not exist anymore. That's, we occasionally call them TERFs, which is trans-excluding radical feminists, but it's more like trans-exterminatory radical feminists, because they literally want to completely stamp out the whole concept of being trans.
Yeah, I don't really use the phrase TERF anymore because I don't believe it's accurate. I mean,
isn't.
There may have been an accuracy to it 5 or 6 years ago. Like, there was a small portion of the radical feminism scene that really didn't like trans people.
I remember.
And yeah, you like people like Sheila Jeffries and Kathy Brennan, and people you don't really hear that much about anymore. And they were definitely in the radical feminist scene. So TERF was accurate. They were trans exclusionary radical feminists. At this point, the organised anti-trans lot are kind of far right. That's where they are. Like, so to call them feminists is inaccurate. The word TERF doesn't necessarily apply to the vast majority of it anymore. So I don't really use it for that reason. Not because I think it's a slur, because it isn't. It's a very descriptive term. But it's just not accurate. And you kind of see the parts of that coming through in all of this stuff with Miriam Cates, who, I mean, I look at her politics and I think, oh, she's pretty far right, She's like someone who, she was in the intake of new MPs in 2019. Like, 10 years ago, I think she would have had a better home in UKIP,
Yeah.
Like, but now the Tory party are basically UKIP, and essentially their far right ring has taken over the party. So I don't think far right's a bad term for her. When, with the moralising stuff about, like, this guy who posted some sexy pic somewhere, or kinky stuff that I don't really understand, but, I don't really care, because I don't care. Like,
yeah,
people do sexy things. Adults do sexy things. Like, why the fuck would I care about that? It comes in with, like, a right-wing moralising angle now. That seems to be what it is. You kind of see that with the Drag Queen Story Hour backlash, which is a very right-wing, like, purity thing, like, moralising thing. And that seems to be a big part of it now.
Children!
Exactly. Whereas the radical feminist side of the trans hate that used to be more of a thing 10 years ago, that came from a gross reductionist oversimplifying of radical feminist academic texts.
Yes, pretty much.
Which kind of had, like, a left-wing feminist bent that was there. Although some will argue that they are also pretty far right and have been influenced and warped by that. And I can see some merit to that argument. But yeah, it's more blatantly far right now, and that's what stinks about this whole thing. And then it ending up with Miriam Cates asking Truss at PMQs about it and being like, we should set the cops on them. And Liz Truss being like, it should be looked into properly. And that was the wildest part for me, because it's just like, There was a series of videos on YouTube called Politics Unboring. I can't remember the guy who did it, but if you just type in Politics Unboring on YouTube, you will find it. And he made the point that sometimes, like, PMQs is bollocks, because sometimes the Prime Minister orders people to ask certain questions. And I don't know if that happened this time, but I'm just saying Liz Truss is famously in the shit right now. Like, famously so. She might have had the most disastrous first 6 weeks as Prime Minister that there's ever been. Like, ever. Like, she fucked the pound and the economy and raised everyone's mortgages a couple of £100, did next to nothing about the energy crisis. She's fucked up so much in 6 weeks. It's astonishing. And so having someone come in and ask about a fucking moral panic kind of thing about a charity that most people in the UK have never fucking heard of.
Well, they have now. Is it because the popular press has been railing against Mermaids for months, if not years, and I'm kind of reticent to fully condemn Mermaids for the guy who was
Dr. Bresler.
Yes, yeah, the one who was found to have those links, because as you say, you do kind of put a certain amount of stock in the places that someone has worked before. Have they done their due diligence? Blah blah blah. It's just a bit surprising that LSE hasn't picked up on that, or have decided that that's not a problem, but they're not going after the LSE, they're going after Mermaids, because Mermaids are the ones trying to support trans youth, and they want to exterminate trans youth and trans adults. But
yeah, you're not wrong. But I've been reading a lot about the line of work where in academia and health research and stuff, which is about, like, trying to stop essentially paedophiles from abusing people, trying to find ways to support and treat them, and trying to work out, is that what he is? Because there's a number of sexologists and all sorts of people that do research on paedophiles, and the work seems pretty important, because if there's a way that we can stop people abusing kids, I think that's probably a good thing. And I can't work out if he is that or not. I genuinely can't work it out. Like, I read the stuff, and to my uneducated brain, I'm just like, wow, this is a bit out there. But then I see people like Dr. Blanchard and Dr. Cantor, like sexologists who GC people quite like, actually. Anti-trans people kind of like them, saying similar things, and I don't know what his deal is, which is why I'm reticent to, like, come out and say he is the devil or he is a saint, because I have no idea. I don't know what Before You Act's deal is, really, and I don't know how the hell I'm going to find out. But what I do know is that, like, if you're running a kids' charity, maybe don't get an academic who works in that area. You know? Maybe don't, because
Sometimes you need an academic.
yeah,
sadly.
but there are academics who aren't in that world who could probably be of just as good use, you know?
Conceivably, but then you and I are not running a charity, so
Yeah, that's true. I mean, what do you think, listeners? Who's right? Me or Ashley? Let us know on all of the social things. You can find us if you put What the Trans into whatever search box you use.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have said that the points that we make are particularly in opposition to each other, but you know.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, we must sadly move on.
Yeah, got a whole other thing, because speaking of weird, slightly terrifying distractions from the economic fuck shambles that is the world today, Liz Truss hasn't been the only person who's been saying weird stuff about trans crap. Current, at time of recording, because everything could change in government at any moment, current Justice Secretary Brandon Lewis has announced that he is going to make it a lot harder for trans women to be placed in women's prisons. According to a bunch of media outlets, including Pink News, and fascist rubbish fires like GB News, Lewis has declared that prisoners with male genitalia, quote-unquote, will no longer be placed in women's prisons. This is in spite of the fact that, according to data released by the Ministry of Justice, link on our website, claims that only 5 or fewer trans inmates who were assigned male at birth were in women's prisons as of April 2021, out of a total of 197 known trans inmates. The data document the MOJ released also went to great pains to point out that this is not likely a totally reliable figure, as the population of trans inmates in the UK's prison estate is likely to be higher for a number of reasons, including trans folks not telling anyone they are trans, having a GRC and not declaring it, etc., etc. So it would appear that the vast majority of trans women prisoners are already in a men's prison. So what is and why is Lewis pushing this through? The safety of others appears to be the chief reason. In a speech at the Conservative Party conference at the beginning of the month, Lewis told the audience, "We all know that stamping out violence against women and girls must not end at the prison gates. I just want to say, it's lovely to see a Conservative Justice Minister actually give a shit about prisoner safety for once. This seems to be only in the context of bashing trans people, but you know, I guess that's an improvement. Ah! The problem is, there appears to be more trans women being assaulted in prisons than there are trans women in women's prisons. As Pink News, in a report covering this, pointed out, 11 sexual assaults in English and Welsh prisons have happened where trans people were the victims. But right now the focus needs to be solving the problem of satisfying trans folks with a policy that isn't likely to change the current system or situation that much for trans prisoners. Especially considering that the Justice Secretary went on to say that this supposed banning of trans women from women's prisons will not be a blanket rule and be on a case-by-case basis, which is how it works now. That's exactly how it fucking works now, Ashley. He's proposing a policy that's exactly the same as what's actually happening. And then the press just reports it like it's a victory for transphobes. And it's just, what is happening? Ah!
It's a culture war. That's what's happening.
Oh, it's so fucking absurd. So this appears to be a pointless exercise that just so happened to garner positive press from the shithouse far-right media that will do nothing to satisfy anything but the absurd fantasies of transphobic fuckheads and totally ignore an actual problem of trans people being far more likely to be sexually assaulted in prisons than cis people. But this is just one of the many trans-related interventions announced noisily in the press over the last couple of weeks by government ministers. Suella Braverman, current Home Secretary, and what happens if a BNP leaflet from 20 years ago gains sentience, according to The Telegraph, has criticised Sussex police over their defence of gendering trans suspects of crimes correctly, calling it identity politics. And she is also, according to a report in The Times, been part of a group of ministers currently fighting to misgender and potentially out trans kids to their parents as part of a shake-up in optional guidance for how to deal with trans kids in schools. So it appears this fucking government has 3 objectives. Cutting taxes for the richest while everyone else is having all their money taken by British Gas. Cutting public services as much as they can. And fucking trans people as some kind of anti-woke spectacle to give their friends in the far-right press something to make bank on. Fuck them. Fuck them. Fuck them forever. Ashley, can I get a fuck them?
Fuck them.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Just can't believe the fucking Ministry of Justice guy just like, I got this new plan. We're going to stop a thing that isn't happening from happening. And we're not going to make it a blanket policy like it is now.
Yeah, the Conservatives are just turning into the American Republican Party.
I know, right? That is a
Basically.
Republican move.
And so's the,
Oh my
being
God.
part of a group of ministers fighting to misgender and out trans kids to their parents. That's exactly what the GOP are trying to do in a number of states in the US. And the Conservative Party is aping them.
I keep saying this about Home Secretaries. Every new one, I'm just like, oh, they're the devil. And then the next one is more devil than the last.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I know. They're awful.
I mean, I don't want to be... Well, actually, I'm going to be shitty about Conservative members, because fuck them.
Yeah.
But I think they've proven at this point that maybe they shouldn't decide everything for everyone else.
Yes. This thing that's happening right now is called minority rule, isn't it? The people in charge are not governing in the interests of the majority of the population. They're, governing in the interests of a group of already rich people who will continue to enrich them, and while the rest of us can just starve to death in the cold, as far as they're concerned. So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
I was just talking about, the attitudes of this government with my flatmate. And it kind of hit me that years ago, when Liz Truss binned the LGBT advisory panel, there were reports, and I was told by some of the people who were there, that Liz Truss, when she would show up to LGBT advisory panel meetings, when she was Minister for Women and Equalities, that she would show up and would just show no interest and have no idea what people were talking about. And then when the conversion therapy ban was going to be a thing, what struck me was that her department had put it in great pains to point out that like conversion therapy in all directions was being banned. So people trying to turn people LGBT was going to be banned, as if that's a thing that actually happens ever. And that showed what Liz Truss's warped view of fairness is. Like, it's got to be the same for all, and she has put that line of thinking to work in economics. Like, everyone should pay the same rate of tax, even though there are people with loads of money who maybe shouldn't have. And when you think of, like, when you finally get your head around her warped view of fairness, suddenly a lot of this makes sense. And then you got the dirty trick of, oh, look at the Tran, the bad Tran. Look at them. Cut tax over here. But look at them. Look at the bad. Look at the people in boats coming from France.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Yeah, it's so blatant. They're not even trying to hide it at this point. Like, Suella Braverman's department pulled out of writing a statement for National Hate Crimes Week, which is coming up. Like, they're not even hiding their utter disdain for minorities and the issues that we face. They are just the devil.
Yeah, pretty much. And, you know, not in a fun kind of way, just in these people are horrible and should not be in charge of anything. You know, I wouldn't put Liz Truss in charge of a local model railway enthusiast group, you know? But here she is, running a country and making everything worse.
After one meeting of that model railway club, it would just cut to the whole place they're meeting being on fire.
Yeah.
That's what would happen. It would burn to the ground.
Yeah. You let Dougal do a funeral? Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's that. Oh, that Arthur guy who wrote that show was really good.
Yes, shame he was the only one that wrote it and there was nobody else involved.
Yeah, the Arthur guy was the only guy who wrote Father Ted. But yeah, we do have a kind of a good news thing. We actually have a good thing to end on. Like,
Yeah. So, just really quick, and something potentially quite good, which is that Eddie Izzard, a comedian who I grew up watching, lots of people were very fond of Eddie Izzard, who has announced that she's going to be running as a Member of Parliament for Sheffield Central in the next general election. So that's quite interesting in and of itself. The current MP, Paul Blomfield, announced that he will not be standing in the next general election, and Izzard hopes to take his spot. So what do we think of that? Another Tran, potentially in Westminster? That'd be good.
Yeah, there's two lines of thinking on this. There's the, well, more of us in the halls of power, maybe having chats with people. That might, you know, make some moves, change a few minds. There might be some minds that can be changed in Parliament. Maybe that's a thing. And then you got the other line of things, which is like, electoral politics is kind of rigged, and they could have all the different kinds of people, but at the end of the day, they'll be serving a corrupt system, so it was not going to make any difference at all. And I don't know who's right. I don't know. But what I do know is that people fucking love Eddie Izzard. She is beloved. Like, I think I made this point on Twitter this week, but not many stand-up comedians in the UK who make it in Hollywood, let alone openly trans for 30 years comedians like Eddie Izzard. So I think it's hers to lose, and we'll see what happens. But I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that she will be a very interesting Member of Parliament.
Agreed.
But yeah, doubling the number of trans people in Parliament will be a good thing. There's currently Conservative MP Jamie Wallace, although that's assuming that like he makes it to the next term, which is going to be tough anyway because Conservatives are losing all sorts of support everywhere, and he stood in a pretty safe Labour seat. And I think Jazz, on a previous podcast, said she believed that he was never supposed to win, but then he did. So who knows there? But yeah, I mean, at the very least, I'm pretty sure we'll have at least one trans MP walking around Parliament.
It's a good start, but, you know, I want them all to be trans, frankly. And then we shall start dealing with the real problems of the country, which is cis people. I'm kidding. Or am I? He's a joke. Or is.
You know, GC people listen to this sometimes. Right?
Do they?
Know
well, I fucking hate you guys. Kill yourselves. Follow your leader.
Yeah, but they'll take that clip and that'll go everywhere.
I stand by what I said, frankly. Fascists should follow their leader and shoot themselves in the face.
Fair do. That is an opinion. And
Yes,
I'm going to leave it there.
Yes,
I'm not
very
going
wise.
to touch that at all.
Very wise.
So now we got a meet on this pod thing. The meet is like where we do a big thing for the second half. If you don't know, if you're new. Because I know that some people are just like, what the fuck are they talking about? They're talking about the meet. The meet is basically what we call the next bit.
Yes.
So the meat of this podcast thing is the world appears to have moved on from COVID-19, despite the fact that COVID-19 doesn't appear to be done with us by a long shot. But people are free to leave their homes and go to the shops, the park, or to their daddy's sex dungeon as much as they like. But that was not the case 2 years ago. Everyone listening to this in the UK will probably never forget being stuck at home for months on end. But astonishingly, a lot of people didn't just sit there and play Among Us all day. A lot of people used that time to come out as some variety of trans or non-binary or something. We did a very unscientific poll on Twitter, @WhatTheTrans, if you're interested in giving us a follow, and apparently 41.9% of the 313 who's responded said that they came out during a COVID-19 lockdown. Now that was astonishing to me.
Yeah, that's way more than I would have expected.
Yeah, so we thought we would talk to a couple of folks who came out during the weirdest moment of recent times. Luckily for us, we didn't have to look far, as 2 of those lockdown egg smashers already work on What the Trans. So here is our chat with Alex, our video queen, and Ben, one of our audio editors. Hey Ben and Alex, welcome to the show that you kind of work on. How are you doing?
Hey.
I'm doing okay.
I'm doing great, yeah.
Good. I mean, I know you're lying because it's 2022 and Liz Truss is in charge and it's all going to hell, but thank you for your optimism. Let's talk coming out. So you are both COVID egg smashers, is that right?
Oh, my egg was thoroughly destroyed in 2020 to 2022.
So it was like a 2-year process of egg smashing for you.
In a way, yes. So during lockdown, all the barbers shut down and little egg me was like, I'm going to use this as an excuse to grow out my hair and experiment with shit. And then 2 years later, my hair was fully grown, and in between that whole process of hair growing, my egg started to crack as I looked at egg IRL for 2 years straight.
Yeah, so it was like a 2-year process for you to become the they person that you are today.
Yes.
Ben, what about you? Was it like something you started to mess around with and eventually it went into place? When did the they-themness of you become a thing?
The themness of me became a thing secretly in my heart. Over a long, long period. I did my whole coming out the way round that is not ideal. In 2014, I started to make use of mysterious internet herbs for transition, long before I talked to anyone, long before I actually worked out entirely what my gender was. I thought, as soon as I realised it was a possibility, I thought, well, failing all else, this is a fascinating science experiment. But I didn't actually come out to anyone as trans or non-binary for a long, long time. And I had privately and secretly come out to friends, and I'd eventually come out to my parents, but not to the world. And I hadn't told anyone I was transitioning. They could guess. There were a couple of clues, but I sort of liked that for quite a while I was obviously doing something, but no one could reasonably ask me about it. But lockdown was where I actually came out, where I actually told my parents, by the way, I've been transitioning. And once I told them that, I could come out publicly and let the world know. And lockdown is actually the reason. Because every year I help to run a holiday camp for 14 to 18-year-olds. And every year I worry that people will know that I am trans/non-binary and that this will be an issue and a distraction, that people will frown upon me. But when the lockdown happened, it turned out we weren't going to do the holiday camp that year. And this was very sad. We were going to do it online instead. But I realised when I heard that news, there's never going to be a longer period between the day that it is today and the day that I see all these people in person again. As much as I like seeing them all in person, this is the perfect day to come out. So that is when I came out publicly on Facebook. So all friends, all family, all folk knew about this. Simply because I finally had an opportunity that was long enough between the present day and when I would talk to people in person, because my great fear with coming out is that people will scorn me in their hearts. If they have, they've done it very politely, because I haven't noticed. People have been very positive. Rather than growing out my hair in lockdown, I cut the sides off it. It was already pretty long, but I like the theory that people started giving themselves haircuts and changing their hair in lockdown because we had no control over our lives at all. It felt like we were buffeted by circumstances. But we could control our hair, and so people start giving themselves undercuts and such, and coming out and experimenting, because finally we realise the only thing we have control over is ourselves. So that's my coming outageness.
Oh wow! Like Alex, could you relate to any of that? Like, I mean, did you come out
Yes.
because of COVID, or did you take advantage of
Oh,
lockdowns?
man, yeah, it was so much taking advantage of COVID. I mean, I had these inklings before, I had stuff from other partners, which it started to come out. That way, when I look back at it, it's like my egg cracking that way. There were signs in my teenage years that I didn't, but at the time I was like, no, I'm just a normal guy. But then during lockdown, I started to check out this small subreddit called Egg IRL because I had more time on my hands because of COVID. And of course, because the hair stuff came out, I took advantage of that as well. And a lot of it was taking advantage of COVID that way. That is right, yeah.
It's like a very strange thing to say, taking advantage of COVID, but then I think a lot of people being indoors did a lot of soul searching because you were there with you.
Oh,
like
exactly,
you're there
yeah.
with you, and so you're just
The
like,
worst
well,
possible person.
I know, right? Like you're stuck with you, and it's like, well, I've run out of Netflix, which I didn't think was possible. But once you get to the documentaries like My Sex Robot or Alien Sightings
You're
2007,
really scraping a barrel.
at that point you're just like, well, I better go look at me now, I guess. I mean, that's how I imagine it. I came out in the before times.
Oh, yeah.
Before the Empire. Like, before Laverne Cox got the gig on that show that meant everyone suddenly knew what being trans was. Like, Alex, you were in lockdown with your family, right?
Yeah, all that fun stuff. So trying to experiment while your family are constantly right next to your door. My dad in his office doing his work stuff, which is just a wall separating me from my own room, and then my dad, and then everybody just in the same house. So when it came to ordering girls' clothes and such, trying to do stuff on the sly as well, trying to figure out yourself, that is always a difficult experience, to say the least.
I've spoken to others who were in that situation. Like, some people said, oh, it was the first chance I had because I couldn't go anywhere, and so I didn't feel like anyone could judge me. Whereas others were very much like you, just like, yeah, I kind of felt like I had to start doing some stuff, but also there were people and ears and eyes everywhere.
And everyone's always around, which means that you can't order shit in.
How did you navigate that?
For that particular occasion, I just had to wait for the times when stuff started to open up again, essentially. So, when Boris was like, yo, you can go on holiday a little bit. My parents were just like, you know what? We're going to go on holiday a little bit. And then they were like, yep, that's a perfect opening to buy some clothes. And, well, they did come in like a flood and then had to figure out how to hide it all again. And that was always also another fun experience. But
I can imagine that also they had a ticking clock as well, because there's probably another lockdown just on the way at some point, and you're like, oh god, now I have contraband.
yeah, what if they sneak in and they see just this random breast on my desk or something?
Just the one.
Oh, like,
Or breasts, so yeah.
oh, those chicken fillet things. Oh,
Oh, they're so satisfying to squish.
those were not the days. I remember those days. They were not the days. Ben, what about you? Your living situation was different. Like,
It
did you feel you
was.
had to hide anyone? Not hide anyone. Hide from anyone, rather.
Well, technically, you are hiding someone. Just
Yes, I guess so. Well, I haven't needed to hide anyone recently, because I was sort of out to most of the people I talked to. just not out very publicly and not out as transitioning. When the lockdown first hit, my housemate was stuck in the French Alps, or deliberately stayed there because it was a nicer place to be. But it meant that I had 3 months, because when lockdown ended, I just acted like lockdown had not ended, because I was very much a shut-in. I had 3 months of actually not seeing anyone in person and talking to anyone in person unless I was buying milk from them. And that was maddening and filled me with despair. But then I got a new housemate, and she is trans, and in fact we have encouraged each other very much since before we both came out and transitioned, and so all is merry and bright. I still, because I wasn't out as actually transitioning until this year, every time I've talked to my parents in the past decade, I've tensed up a bit because I know I have this secret. And I know that they know. I know that they know I know. And so on and so forth. But I finally actually talked to them and let them know about it. After which I could actually talk to the world and let the world know I was transitioning. I finally talked to them about it this spring. And when I looked back to actually the first time I started dabbling with Pueraria mirifica, the mysterious internet phytoestrogenic herb, in 2014, the gap between me starting a transition on a very DIY level and actually telling my parents was 2,600 days. So my advice to anyone who's thinking of starting a transition and keeping it entirely secret and then feeling very strange about it and not telling anyone, actually tell someone. Talk to someone about your extraordinary gender circumstances, because doing the other way around is topsy-turvy in a way that is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's the only way you can do it, doing what you need to do before you can talk to anyone, but it's problematic somewhat.
Oh yeah, because that reminds me of my situation where it's not to my parents for this specific occasion, but for the first person I came out to was my best friend, and I chatted to him about the situation, and a little later on, as I was starting to get the estrogen and everything, his mum came up to me and said, I'm trying to wean myself off of this estrogen, and now I've got some leftover estrogen bottles lying around, and since I now know you're trans and you need to transition, if you wanted some extra estrogen, I've got some here for you.
Nice.
And it was exactly the same estrogen bottles. So, in fact, coming out can assist in your transition in can possibly, may not guarantee, but could help in your transition.
If there's any elder women around who have got a few or less solos lying around or something, then your quid's in. You're doing good. I think that's a very, very trans femme thing though. Like, I don't think you can necessarily get away with that with testosterone, because that's some serious shit. But that's very, very cool of her.
It was.
One of the things that first started me questioning my gender in a substantial way was when a housemate I had back almost a decade ago said to me, with nothing to prompt it that I'm aware of, that hormones can be dangerous things and you shouldn't start just taking them. I thought, why is she telling me this? Does she think I'm trans? Am I trans? Which raised the second question of, hormones are things you can get. I always assumed that trans women's breasts came through some surgical method, because I had been led astray in my understanding by the League of Gentlemen, among other things. But having been told not to mess with hormones, when I'd never considered messing with hormones, I immediately had the idea of, maybe I should mess with hormones. And maybe this implies something about myself that I had not noticed.
So what you're saying is, you got transed.
Yes! Yes!
Oh, it's brilliant.
Whoops.
Well, that's a thing that, when, the bigots and the bad uns, who I don't want to spend too much dwelling on here, they are not the focus by any means, but there's a thing I've noticed where they will say things like, they fundamentally don't understand what transing is. Like, for me, it was, oh, that's possible? That's something I can do? Okay, that seems like an answer to a whole bunch of problems I have. Not all my problems, but a bunch of them. And so then people see it from the outside, mistake that as, oh, you got the idea for being trans from that thing. And it's like, no, that just confirmed that I could fulfill my deepest desires. You know what I mean?
I went through a long period of thinking, I wish I was trans. That would be nice. But alas, I'm just an awkward bum.
Oh, same.
Oh my god! Like I had the same thing, but I wasn't. But my coming out wasn't in the middle of hopefully a once in a generation ridiculous situation like lockdown. Like
What a silly decade.
yeah, we did a poll on the Twitter.
Oh yeah, this one.
Yeah, it was something like 300 people got back to us, and something like 40% said that they came out during a lockdown, and I was astonished by that. Does that surprise you?
I mean, it's just crazy to think that less than half of the 300 people have said it, and that's considering that probably a lot of our audience is an older set of people who've come out for a long while, but this has happened. But to be honest, I'm not too surprised, really. I think given what you've mentioned, Ben, and, you know, lockdown being a time when people are experimenting and checking themselves out, some very interesting shit happened with some people during it. About not all of us were making sourdough, some of us were making tits with estrogen.
And there was that period of people being like, I'm going to write a book. And you're like, no, you're not. No one's going to write a book during this. And then some people did. And I hated them.
Dare they?
How dare they do a thing that I feel I should have done? That's what that is, isn't it? That's the emotion I'm feeling.
Yes. Whenever I hear of anyone I know actually writing a book or doing anything, really, I think, how dare this person do it while I have sat here doing nothing but growing out my hair and my bosoms, which is a valid thing to do.
Yeah,
hell
well,
yeah.
to be fair, you both used your lockdowns pretty well. Like I was reading about, like, you know, there were loads of divorces.
I haven't had any of those.
Well, I mean, they can be a bit strange, a divorce. They can go a bit weird. I don't know. I mean, if you're in a bad marriage, you probably should go and get a divorce from the divorce shop. But you know, it can be quite challenging. But you know, people are stuck at home. They have to evaluate their life, and like there's an old adage that like relationships and stuff go on for 2 years longer than they should.
And if you're stuck in the same building as them,
Yeah, I can imagine that like COVID-19 accelerated that, and a lot of other people definitely came out. But at the time, like, because the NHS was, you know, only doing one thing at that point, really, which was nightmarish to think back now, like setting up crematoriums and outdoor hospitals that mostly ended up not being used, which was weird, and just basically being ventilation factories. When it came to, like, changing your details of the NHS, were there any issues with that during that time?
Mainly my own awkwardness.
Your own awkwardness?
My own awkwardness, yeah. Going to the NHS and sort of very gingerly asking if they could please possibly change my details. But I think I am paranoid and awkward and always assume that people will look on me with vengeance and disgust, which I think is not actually the case. But I always fear going to them and asking the favour of having my name and gender acknowledged. I realise having my name acknowledged is not that difficult, because confusingly when I changed my name, having realised I was trans, I changed the surname and not the forename, because I couldn't find a name that suited me better than Ben. I did extend it. But going to the NHS, I felt very awkward going to them and saying, please change these things. But they just do it because it's boring admin to them. Or they don't do it because they're horrible. But mainly they just do it because it's boring admin. And if you ask, that's it.
Yeah. What about you, Alex? Like, did you try to seek like healthcare through like trans healthcare through the NHS during COVID?
the NHS situation, I do admit I haven't got round to changing it yet. It's mainly because I haven't interacted with the NHS in a while, but I sort of didn't bother trying to do the NHS system because I heard about all the nightmares that it was, and didn't want to bother. I didn't really want to go through that system, seeing how bad it was, and I decided to just go private straight away. So I haven't actually
That seems to be a more common thing with them right now. I keep hearing more and more people going to your gender cares, gender GP, gender doctors. You know, that seems to be more of a thing, especially post-COVID. Now I feel like an absolute bastard because I got into a GIC within my lifetime.
Oh yeah.
These days, that's a seems to be a luxury.
Yes. When I signed up for the NHS GIC a few years ago, the wait time was only 65 weeks.
That's like
It's a long
nothing
time,
now.
but compared to what it is now, it was,
Yeah. So, what was your biggest coming out mistake during lockdowns?
I think, if anything, I sort of came out over text to everyone because I was just so slightly, you got the social anxiety and the social awkwardness. You're like, okay, if I come out, I think they're probably going to be fine. They're going to be nice. But then it's that awkward overhang conversation afterwards. And then you've still got to hang out with them afterwards. And it's like this thing overhanging. But then it's just like, oh yeah, you're trans. All right.
I've done that. I've done it. I came out to someone at their house and we planned to watch a movie afterwards. And they're like, do you want to watch the movie still? And I was like, yes. And then you just sit there and you're stewing in it. Did I watch the movie? No. Was my face looking at the movie? Yes. But I didn't watch it. And I don't think they did either. I think we both just sat there stewing in our stuff, just like,
oh.
This isn't... What do we do now?
I have made the mistake of coming out in sort of vague terms to people over text, and then when I meet them, I'm never sure if do they know, do they understand, do they even remember the message? I can't come out of them again. I think I made most of my coming out mistakes before lockdown, and I realise this is all about coming out during lockdown. I think I came out substantially and fully, or fully-ish, fully-esque, during lockdown, but I think I was rectifying earlier mistakes of suppressing information and having a secret gender.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, living stealth is hard. I mean, that's kind of what you were doing, right? And it's hard because you got secrets and you got to hide some things and you got to kind of always be a little bit on guard. And at a certain point, like you said, I guess people are sort of asking you, what's happening? You seem different.
Living stealth is a very strange phrase to me because in that case, it's sort of hiding the fact that I am trans and trying to seem cis to people. But I hear it used also to mean being trans but trying to seem cis in the gender you were not assigned initially. I had a housemate once who was and is trans and very keen on being stealth, and no one being aware that she was trans and just being taken as a cis woman in all circumstances. And I can understand that, but it seems very different to what I was doing of trying to make people think that I haven't changed from the lumpen creature that I was assigned, if that makes sense.
I think for me, a lot of it with the haircut was like, it was a time when the people closed the shops, and then when it started to reopen, Mum and Dad were like, oh yeah, you should go and cut your hair now. I think it's looking a bit messy now. And I was like, no, I'm not cutting my hair.
And you were like, no!
And then I was like, oh, why do you not want to cut your hair? And I was like, I just don't want to. I don't want to cut my hair. And it was just this awkward overhanging question of like, how do I explain I don't want to cut my hair without coming out at that exact moment? But it was always a bit of a perilous one. So it was definitely with the appearances things you mentioned. And then I've got an experience with the boobs bit, but in terms of that coming out during lockdown, but it's definitely the hair one that was the main one for me.
So how did you have the conversation with them eventually, assuming that has now occurred?
Oh yes, that has occurred now. And so one of the days, it was fortunate that things were starting to open up now. You couldn't really go out to do recreation, but you could just do work. And everyone was like, not everyone was in the office at the same time, so I sort of used the excuse of getting out to somewhere else. It was sort of just like 2021 sort of September time. I think we're still in a sort of lockdown by then. I headed to the office because they were like, nope, you're coming into the office now. You've got no choice. And you're like, I like working from home. And I was like, you know what? I can do my usual of coming out via text. And basically, I sent the message on my parents' WhatsApp, which we have. And I said, I'm transitioning. When I get home, let's not talk about it because I know it's going to be bloody awkward. And then I got home, and as we were cooking dinner, it was still bloody awkward. And then, a few days later, I was going to then start buying hormones and stuff. And I was like, oh yeah, Dad, can I have a lift to the pharmacy? He was like, oh yeah, I'll give you a drive over there. And then along the way, we had some conversations about stuff, and my dad was like, okay, if you're going to do this, you need to meet with other LGBT people. You don't go out enough. Find some friends. And I was like, yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I probably should. And then my mum was exactly the same, and it was more, they didn't really worry too much about the trans side of things. Just, all right, just go out and hang out with people. Be a sociable fucker for once.
I guess we're coming up to time, but I'd like to ask you one more thing. So, do you think that if COVID didn't happen in 2020, like, how long do you think it would have taken you to, like, you know, come out and tell everyone?
Oh, that is a very...
I could do a good question, just if I remember
it. Really is.
For me, I think it was getting more and more inevitable, and the holiday camp was very much the thing that was keeping me back from being very overt about this, but eventually I was going to have to say something. And actually, during lockdown, I've had a very supportive housemate who has encouraged me a lot with being able to come out and be open about, I guess, all sorts of things. And I think that sort of made it more inevitable that I would come out to everybody and stop concealing my transition. But I don't know. Maybe I would still be struggling awkwardly with my secret anatomy.
Yeah, so I'm still trying to think now, because a lot of the time I'm just so socially awkward that the whole growing out my hair during lockdown would have not cracked my egg as much. But there was like this small subreddit called Egg IRL that I think I was starting to explore before lockdown, before it all happened, and I have a slight feeling that they would have cracked my eggs significantly. But I think the fortunate thing is lockdown did happen, and I'm on the path that I am on now, I suppose.
It's probably best not to overthink these things. But I just found the idea of coming out during COVID so very fascinating.
So if the situation didn't happen, it would have...
I mean, it's a bit like a movie. Like, oh, there's a pandemic. It's the end times. I might as well live my true self whilst I can, you know?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Exactly, hell yeah.
We've got to re-examine ourselves and think, if we're not going to do it now, what are we going to do now?
Like, what else could I be waiting for?
Yeah.
This is the sign.
If you're listening and you've been wanting to come out throughout lockdown and you're disappointed the lockdown is over, you're the only person who's disappointed the lockdown is over. But don't worry, we're still in a time of crisis, so I'm sure you'll find an opportunity to come out before the disaster is fully resolved. Whichever disaster you're thinking of at this occasion. We've got a few.
As of time of you watching or reading, listening to this.
Yeah, this is a podcast. If they're watching it, then they're doing it wrong.
They could be watching. Yeah. They could have it in one of those programs with a visualizer, where the sort of lines whiz around the screen in a way that slightly represents the audio. And if you're doing that, hello, dear viewers.
You can see my voice. All right, let's stop playing with people's hypothetical synthesizers and visualizers and stuff, and wrap this up. Ben, Alex, where can people find your stuff, apart from What the Trans, which you both do incredible work for all the time? Thank you.
People can find my stuff at Ben Swithin on Twitter. That's Swithin with an E. Or they can find the game that I made, which has a lot of trans content, which is about a sheep who goes to university. It's called Buy Hyacinths.
Alex, where can people find you?
All you need to do is look up BedwellJ101 on any choice of social media except TikTok, and you should be able to find me, so at BedwellJ101 at Twitter, Instagram, all that kind of thing. You can see my socials on there. I even have a Reddit account on there, so /BedwellJ101. That's my account, and yeah.
So go find Alex on social media things I don't understand because I'm too old. And yeah, thanks for chatting about the COVID comings out.
Hooray!
Yay!
So, did you come out during a lockdown? How was it for you? Please let us know. Send us your thoughts and your stories via all of the online things, and we might end up reading out your stuff on the next pod. You can get us on Twitter at WhatTheTrans. Of course, we're on Facebook as WhatTheTrans. We have whatthetrans.com as our shiny website. All of those things have ways to get in touch with us. So yeah, let us know.
And on that, we should probably end this because, like, you listener probably made it to work by now. So thanks for listening to us on your journey to work or wherever the hell you're going, and see you next time. Goodbye. This episode of What the Trans was written, produced by Ashley Talbot and Michelle Snow, and was edited by Ben Swithin and Michelle Snow.
And we'd like to thank all of our Patreon producer-level supporters, who are Sophia the Sixth,
Lentil,
Philippa Taprogue,
Ramona Martinez,
Alethea Aurora,
Chagall, they them,
Clara Vuljemi,
Amelia,
Kara the asexual turf buster, and her trusty sidekick, Jiggly Jumps,
Candy Cox,
Zeph,
Fiona McDonald,
Torikuso H,
Murgatroyd,
Claire Renshaw,
Ontologically Unjust,
Stevie Lang,
Stella,
Michaela Irish,
Cindergosa,
Rebecca Prentice,
Graham Mulholland,
Crazy Richard,
Dan Oblivion,
Georgina Young,
Ty Griffiths,
Florence Stanley,
Riley,
Helen _
Chrissy Jarvis,
A dyslexic velociraptor feels blessed at witnessing the Spookmaster General's stunning performance.
Nick Ross,
Alice Chalkley,
Melody Nix,
Fiona Punchard,
John,
Lynn Mackay,
Nick Duffy,
C.B. Bailey,
Gordon Cameron,
Peter Kimball,
Wen Witherup,
Vic Parsons,
Tila Wild,
Vanessa Billington,
Rowan Littlejohns,
Desiree Markland,
Patreon user,
Vic Kelly,
Emma Doyle,
Catherine,
Elliot McVeigh,
Cassius Adair,
Melissa Brooks,
Karakan 12,
Ian Coomber,
April Heller,
Sophie Lewis,
Alexandra Lilly,
Claire Scott,
Ariadne Pena,
Lauren O'Nions,
Bernard's Pink Jellybean,
Lanos.
and Chris Hubley. Thank you so much to you all.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.